Okay, so we left off with the just adjusting my camera here. Uh, the contradictions between the various gospel accounts of the resurrection, the alleged contradictions, I should say. Um, well, this is kind of a hold on here. This is kind of a dead horse that people keep on kicking for some reason. Uh, so I'm really not going to go through it in a lot of detail here in this video. I want to try to keep it down to 2 videos. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over all the details of a thorough response to that. I do have a couple of brief uh, comments though. The first is that a lot of these irreconcilable differences are where we read in one gospel that at least Mary Magdalene went to the tomb Easter morning, and then another gospel says that Mary and other women went to the tomb on Easter morning. Well, how that could be a contradiction, I will never understand, but that is what some, at least, of these so-called inconsistencies consist of. A second point that I would like to make, and then I'll move on, is that the inerrancy of the Gospels being assumed has never, I don't think, been part of a defense of the historicity of the resurrection. Uh, People that argue for the historicity of the resurrection do not normally assume that the Gospels are inerrant. They may believe that they're inerrant, but they don't use that as a presupposition in an argument, usually, well, ever so far as I'm aware, um, as an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. Okay, so let's see here. The resurrection, Martin says, was not directly eyewitness per se, but was inferred from the empty tomb. And he goes on to say the post-resurrection appearances. Um, so the inference is the tomb is empty, and then they see Jesus. There's an appearance, but the resurrection itself was not directly eyewitness, and I suppose that's correct. The resurrection had already occurred by the time the woman arrived at the tomb, according to the gospel accounts. But the empty tomb was not mentioned by the earliest Christian writings. Uh, for example, the Pauline epistles, which predate the Gospel of Mark, say. Um, Martin says so. The um, contention here, the claim that Martin is making, is that the datum of the empty tomb was probably something that entered into the preaching message later on. It wasn't part of what people generally recognized from day one. Um, so it's not. It's less reliably known that the tomb was in fact empty. He says. Well, I don't know. I mean, the whole New Testament uh, is all about the resurrection of Christ. So uh, whether Paul explicitly says, "I was there at the time of the resurrection. I saw the dead body coming back to life," is irrelevant. The fact is that all the gospel writers and epistle writers and the author of Acts, they all accepted the tomb was empty, because how could a dead body get up and walk around and meet with them, the disciples, without the tomb that was once full now being empty? So it's misleading and simply false that the earliest writers of the New Testament uh, did not report an empty tomb. Now, the appearances, according to Martin, there's only one early eyewitness appearance, and that was to Paul. But Martin argues that could have been a hallucination. He's on the road to Damascus, according to the book of Acts, and he sees a bright light, hears a voice, but maybe he was hallucinating. Well, uh, the, whatever we want to make of the appearance to Paul, the fact remains that there were appearances to all of the apostles. As a matter of fact, you can't be an apostle unless you have seen the risen Christ. That's one of the uh, reasons why we know there aren't apostles today, contrary to Roman Catholicism and Mormonism. Uh, the apostles had to be eyewitnesses. They had to be with Jesus before uh, the well the normal course was they were with Jesus before the crucifixion, and they also saw him afterwards, after he rose again. So it's a little bit different with Paul, but he still saw the resurrected Christ. Um, People today haven't seen the resurrected Christ. Um, in 1 Corinthians 15, which was written by Paul, there is a creed which goes back to uh, several years within the crucifixion, say 5 years or so after the crucifixion, uh, that says that he appeared to over 500 people at once. Jesus appeared to over 500 people at once. Some of those people are still alive. So whoever wrote the creed originally may or may not have been an eyewitness, but those eyewitnesses were around, and they handed on the creed to Paul, and the uh, writers of the four Gospels, um, as best we can tell, two of them were eyewitnesses, and then two of them, the other two, were uh, writing on behalf of eyewitnesses. So Mark was writing for Peter, and um, Luke was not an eyewitness. He was, I forget who he was writing for, but Matthew was one of the apostles, and um, John was the beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved. So they were eyewitnesses. Um, so the traditional authorship of the Gospels is debated, but that was something that Martin, well, he may have addressed it, but he didn't really, I don't think, give a compelling argument against the traditional authorship. It is normally argued against by certain Bible scholars, but Martin is certainly not a Bible scholar and didn't really uh, interact with the literature. Um, Nobody outside of the Christian Bible confirms a resurrection, was his next point. So the various pagan and Jewish historians, Josephus, Tacitus, etc., um, he includes Philo in there, not as a historian, but as somebody who uh, should have mentioned the resurrection, excuse me, or uh, not something that they actually believed in, but something that they commented on other people believing, um, and they were arguing against. For example, Josephus uh, does not say that the Jewish authorities could have produced the body of Jesus to stop the Christian movement. So therefore, uh, we don't have independent attestation, non-Christian attestation to the resurrection. Um, well, I mean, a a a Christian is essentially somebody who accepts um, the term Christian is essentially synonymous with one who believes that the resurrection of Jesus Christ occurred. Not exactly, but that's a near synonym. Um, so the fact that other people are not describing a resurrection is not surprising. Now, the fact that they more people aren't arguing against it might be surprising, but uh, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The only Jewish historian from that time is Josephus, and he does talk about Jesus, despite what Martin wants to say. Maybe not the resurrection, but he does talk about Jesus as a historical figure. Martin objects, has doubts that Jesus was a historical person. Um, and the fact is that non-Jewish people that were historians from that time wouldn't really be too concerned if they were as superstitious as Martin wants us to believe at that time. People doing miraculous works, rising from the dead and so on, wouldn't be all that unusual. And if it wasn't people that were in the Roman cultus, we would not expect them to mention it. Then he goes on and outlines an argument from Habermas. Uh, Gary Habermas gives various historical bedrock data. Almost out of time, so I'm really going to have to rush through this. The empty tomb, the eyewitnesses of the disciples of the post-resurrection appearances, the early proclamation of the resurrection, the transformation of eyewitnesses, and the people who are going to die for their conviction. He misrepresents that fourth one. Um, they were willing to die for what they believed was true, but the way he presents it is people dying for a lie. Of course, people die for lies all the time. That's not what Habermas argued. The Jewish leaders could not disprove the disciples' message, even though they had the power and motivation to do so. The conversion of two skeptics, Paul and James, and the Shroud of Tehran, or the Shroud of Turin. And there was a few other ones as well, which he doesn't repeat. All those are data that most scholars would admit, and they do point to the resurrection of Jesus. I wish I had more time, but I'm right out of time. My computer's way too slow uploading videos now, so I'm going to have to leave it at that. Um, the case is very weak and does not accomplish what it sets out to do, to raise a significant amount of doubt uh, to the historical credibility of the gospel, of the uh, charisma. So we are not, we don't have to worry, we don't have to give up our faith. It doesn't raise a significant amount of doubt. It's not a successful defeater, is what I'm trying to say. This book and this chapter against the resurrection fails in what it is attempting to do. It does not meet its burden of proof. Thank you for watching, and um, I'm sorry I'm going so quickly and stumbling over my words here, but I've got like 10 seconds. Shalom out.